Ladies and gentlemen, you have now seen the impossible accomplished in front of your faces.
Property under civil law comprehends every species of title, inchoate or complete, legal or equitable. As a legal concept, property is generally said to have the following requisites. First, utility or the capacity to satisfy some human wants such as for food, shelter, clothing, knowledge, comfort, recreation, and etc. This utility, which is generally economic, endows property with value susceptible of pecuniary estimation. Second is substantivity or individuality or the quality of having existence apart from any other thing. Thus, parts of the human body such as the hair, blood, and teeth cannot exist by themselves independent of the body. They become property only when separated from the body of the person to whom they belong. And lastly, appropriability or the susceptibility of being possessed by men. Res communes, or otherwise known as common things such as sunlight, air, and the ocean, are not capable of appropriation in their entirety as such, although they may be appropriated under certain conditions in a limited way. For example, electricity, oxygen, distilled water, and thereby become property in law. A thing, res nullius, may have no owner because it has not been appropriated, for example, wild animals or hidden treasures, or because it has been lost or abandoned by the owner. It constitutes property as long as it is susceptible of being possessed for the use of man. Things cannot be considered as property when they are not susceptible of appropriation because of physical impossibility such as the sun, the moon, and other heavenly bodies, or legal impossibility such as the human body while the person is alive as it is outside the commerce of man. However, under certain conditions, the body of a person or parts thereof may be the subject matter of a contract. Example, posing as a model, donation of blood, or a corpse. But an onerous contract involving one's own body or a corpse, even for medical.
Property as distinguished from a thing. The word thing is used interchangeably with property under the New Civil Code. However, technically speaking, a thing is broader in scope because it includes not only appropriable objects but also non-appropriable objects. An example of a thing is the moon and the stars. They are things but not property because neither of them are susceptible of appropriation nor under the appropriation of men. Some other non-appropriable objects are forces of nature. Generally, they are not properties, but if brought under the control of human beings, they become properties. An example of this is lightning. It is a thing until humans capture it to produce electricity, in which case it becomes a property.
And now we move to the types of immovable properties, which are all enumerated under Article 415 of the Civil Code. First, land, buildings, roads, and constructions of all kinds adhered to the soil. Land would be the best example of immovable property. However, a shovelful of land is a personal property since it is no longer adhered to the soil, but when it is used to cover land, then it becomes immovable again. Buildings are immovable by incorporation. A building sold to be demolished immediately, however, would be considered as movable property. But a building is immovable whether it is erected by the owner, a lessee, or usufructuary of a land. This is also stated in the case of Evangelista versus Alto Surety. Now, constructions of all kinds, the attachment must be more or less permanent. For example, railroads, a wall or fence with the intention to attach it again. Second on the list of enumerations, trees, plants, and growing fruits. The reason for this is that they become immovable property on the theory that they derive their existence or sustenance from the soil. However, in the case of growing crops that are for sale, they become personal property on the ground that the crops are sold. Then it is understood that they are to be gathered and removed from the soil. For the third enumeration, it includes everything attached to an immovable in a fixed manner. It is to be noted that this is real property by incorporation and they need not be placed by the owner. A good example of this would be the case of Yap versus Tanyada, where a water pump and its accessories can be separated from an immovable without being broken or suffering deterioration. It merely involves the loosening of bolts and dismantling of fasteners. Also, in another case, electric lines, submarine cables, and communication cables are not directly adhered to the soil, but they may be classified as machinery and immovable property.
Tao po, tao po.
Ano yun, Iho?
City Assessor po, ma'am. Maniningil lang po ng real property tax para sa mga transformers under Meralco.
Aba, Iho, those properties are not subject to real property tax. Baka nagkakamali ka.
Naku, ma'am, hindi po. They are subject to real property tax.
Hindi nung panahon ko sabi ng korte noong 1964 na personal property pa daw yung mga yan. Pero teka, let me ask my lawyer.
Wait, tatawag si ma'am. Okay. Hello, ma'am.
Hello, attorney. May tatanong lang ako. May nagpunta kasi sa opisina tapos sinisingil ako ng real property tax para sa mga transformers and transmission lines. Nung bata pa ako, there was a case of Board of Assessment appeal versus Meralco saying that steel powers or poles of Meralco are not subject to real property tax because they are personal property. Sino bang tama sa aming dalawa?
Nako, ma'am. Tama si City Assessor. In the 2015 ruling of Manila Electric Company versus City Assessor, the Supreme Court ruled that transformers, electric poles, transmission lines, insulators, and electric meters are machineries subject to real property tax. The local government code provides that machineries to be deemed real property subject to real property tax did not longer be annexed to the land or building, as this may or may not be attached permanently or temporarily to the real property. And in fact, ma'am, such machineries may even be mobile.
Ay, ganun po ba? Sorry, hindi na pala ako updated. Sige, attorney, ano na pa ba ang mga subject to real property tax under our new jurisprudence?
Ma'am, including the submarine wires or cable used for communication po may be taxed like other real estate as held in the case of Capital Wireless versus Provincial Treasurer Batangas.
Thank you so much for your enlightenment, attorney. Nakakahiya tuloy sa city assessor. Sige, tatawagan ko na siya ulit.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you po.
Thank you.
Statues, reliefs, paintings, or other objects for use or ornamentation. It must be noted that the property must be placed on a building or land, and it must be placed by the owner of the immovable or by his agent, buildings or lands. The fifth one are the machineries, receptacles, instruments, or implements for an industry or works. Very important here to take note of the test of essentiality, meaning that the machineries must be an essential and principal element of the industry or works, without which such industry or works would be unable to function or carry on the industrial purpose for which it has been established, and not merely incidental. This is further cited in the case of Mindanao Bus Corporation versus City Assessor and Treasurer. And a machinery, although movable in nature, becomes immobilized when placed on a plant by the owner of the property, but not when placed by a person who has temporary right over it, unless such person acted as the agent of an owner, or in the case of a tenant and he had promised to leave the machinery on the tenement at the end of the lease. These properties are immobilized by destination. We also included in our presentation the definitions and differences of machinery, equipment, and implements for your better understanding of what this covers.
Sir, please surrender those printing machines and newspapers. These are all subject of the search warrant for your alleged subversive activities.
Hindi nga. Real property ko kaya to.
And what made you say that?
Plus, wala kang probable cause. And the two warrants issued indicated only one and the same address, where in fact, you're searching on two different locations.
Sir, sa'yo ba tong mga articles, newspapers, and printing machines?
Wala akong pakis na nararamdaman mo.
Sir, are you the owner of this? Sa'yo ba tong mga to?
Wala akong naririnig.
Alam mo sir, there's only one way to settle this. Let's read the case of Burgos versus Chief of Staff. Machinery which is movable by nature becomes immobilized when placed by the owner of the tenement on property or plant, but not so when placed by a tenant, usufructuary, or any other person having only temporary right, unless such person acted as the agent of the owner. In that case, the printing machines, equipment, paraphernalia, and other articles used in the printing, publication, and distribution of the said newspapers were alleged to be only in the possession and control of petitioner Burgos. Petitioners did not claim to be the owners of the land or building in which the machineries were placed. This being the case, the machineries in question, while in fact bolted on the ground, remain to be movable properties susceptible to seizure under search warrant. Sir, parang ikaw to. You never claimed to be the owner of the machineries in questions.
Hala, parang ikaw din to eh. Your warrant does not satisfy the requirement of probable cause kasi yung witness mo, puro general statements lang.
Ay anak, kamusta na?
Okay lang po ma, ikaw po kamusta?
Ito, okay lang naman ako dito sa US. Naaalala ko lang din kasi, kamusta nga pala yung ice cream shop natin? Subject daw ba to real property tax? Yung mga machines at freezers?
Kakatanong ko lang po sa kilala kong attorney. Ang sabi niya daw po, oo.
Ha? Eh di ba considered sila as movable properties? Naiangat naman yun, tsaka nabubuhat at nagagalaw. Ano sila magiging subject to real property tax kung di naman sila real properties?
Ang sabi po kasi ni attorney, nakalagay daw po sa batas na considered daw as immovable property ang machinery, receptacles, instruments, or implements intended by the owner of the tenement for an industry or works which may be carried on in a building or on a piece of land and which tend directly to meet the needs of said industry or works.
Ah, ganun ba? So, paano na yung mga ice cream machines natin tsaka freezers? Within the scope ba siya ng batas para ma-consider as real property?
Oo daw po, sabi ni attorney, since yung ice cream machines and yung freezer, considered daw siya as essential and principal element ng shop natin. Hindi magpa-function ng shop kung wala yung mga equipments, kaya considered siya as real property at taxable siya.
Ay nako, buti na lang pala humingi ka ng advice kay attorney. Kung di, wala talaga tayong kaalam-alam dito sa subject na to, na hindi natin alam pala na subject to real property tax na pala yung equipment sa machine. Eh, nabalitaan mo ba yung nangyari kay Tita Eunice mo? So ito na nga, na-sheriff nga daw yung opisina, tapos nung nagkanda-gulo-gulo na, pinaghuhugot saka dinismantle daw yung equipment.
Ay oo ma, hindi naman kasi pwede ipilit na movable property yun, halata na masyado eh. They could not have removed the equipment without breaking the material and deterioration of the object. Sabi nga ng korte, inasmuch as the machinery and equipment involved in this case were duly installed and affixed in the premises of respondent company, when petitioner's representative caused said property to be dismantled and then removed, it follows that petitioner must also do everything necessary to the reinstallation of said property in conformity with its original condition.
Ay, alam mo, medyo sticky talaga yung mga ganyang situations. Kaya important talaga malaman kung anong movable at immovable property. Yung kay Tito sa Surge, naalala mo ba? Alam mo, lakas din ang business nun dati. Nung nagka-problem na nga lang sa pera at nagkaroon na ng rate of replevin, sinubukan ng tito mo i-defer yun.
Di ba nakuha nila yung isang machinery?
Oo, sabi nung sa leasing and finance, personal property na daw yun. Alam mo, actually, umakyat na rin sa korte yung kaso. Kasi oo nga naman, although each of them was movable or personal property on its own, all of them have become immobilized by destination because they are essential and principal elements in the industry. Pero kasi, nasa batas din natin na contracting parties may validly stipulate that a real property be considered as personal. After agreeing to such stipulation, they are consequently stopped from claiming otherwise. So wala rin, na-stop din sila ng previous agreement nila.
Ma, parang medyo napahaba po ata kwentuhan natin
Oo nga pala. Sige nak, alis na ako Kailangan ko nang bumalik sa work. Finalo up ko lang talaga yung sa shop kasi ilang araw ko na rin iniisip yun eh.
Sige po ma, love you, ingat po palagi.
Love you din, huwag ka muna ng boyfriend.
For the sixth enumeration, animal houses, pigeon houses, beehives, fish ponds, or breeding places of similar nature, it is very important to note that this must be permanent part of an immovable and must be placed or preserves them with the intention of permanent attachment by the owner. Animals are to be regarded as personal property for purposes of criminal law. Seventh are fertilizers actually used on a piece of land. These are immovable by destination, but if kept somewhere or still in containers, they will be considered as personal properties or movable. Mines, quarries, and slug dumps. The definitions are also included in our presentation so that you may distinguish them from each other. It is to be noted that waters which are immovable, such as sea, river, or lake, must not be confused with water itself, which is plainly movable property. Docks and structures. Since waters either running or stagnant are considered immovables, it is logical that constructions united to them in a fixed and permanent manner are also immovable. Vessels are considered personal property under the civil law and common law, although of peculiar kind. They partake to a certain extent of the nature and conditions of real property because of their value and importance in commerce.
Uy pre, kamusta? Kamusta si Lolo? Okay lang naman ako tol, kaso si Lolo humihina na kasi matanda na.
Ay ganun ba pre? Wala pala yun sa lolo ko eh. Yung lolo ko kahit 83 years old na, alam niya pa rin ang jurisprudence ng case nila Lopez versus Orosa Jr. Sabi niya, movable equipment to be immobilized in contemplation of the law must first be essential and principal elements of an industry or works without which such industry or works would be unable to function or carry on the industrial purpose for which it was established. The tools and equipment are not essential and principal municipal elements of petitioner's business of transporting passengers and cargoes by motor trucks. Sabi pa niya, while it is true that generally, real estate connotes the land and the building constructed thereon, it is obvious that the inclusion of the building, separate and distinct from the land, in the enumeration of what may constitute real properties could mean only one thing, that the building is by itself an immovable property.
Wow, ang galing naman ng lolo mo. Pero wala yan sa lolo ko. Ang lolo ko kahit 125 years old na, dalawa ang alam niya na jurisprudence. Sa'yo, isa lang. Unang jurisprudence na alam niya ay yung case nila Yap versus Tanyada. Sabi raw doon, the Civil Code considers as immovable property, among others, anything attached to an immovable in a fixed manner, in such a way that it cannot be separated therefrom without breaking the material or deterioration of the object. Kaya naman, the pump does not fit this description. Yung pump na yon could be separated from Yap's premises without being broken or suffering deterioration. Pangalawang jurisprudence na alam niya ay yung case nila Fels versus Batangas. Article 415 of the new Civil Code provides that docks and structures which, though floating, are intended by their nature and object to remain at a fixed place on a river, lake, or coast are considered immovable property. Power barges are categorized as immovable property by destination, being in the nature of machinery and other implements intended by the owner for an industry or work which may be carried on in a building or on a piece of land and which tend directly to meet the needs of said industry or work.
Lastly, contracts for public works and servitudes, and other real rights. The properties referred to in this last enumeration are not material things but rights which are necessarily intangible. Hence, a real right over a real property is also a real property, and the real right over a personal property is considered personal property.
Okay, good evening, classmates. So, I am Kim Abraham Ramos. So, I am here to discuss movable property. So, again, let's define movable property. So, what is movable property? From the word itself, movable, property that can be moved. So, for example, an iPad is a movable property. A guitar is a movable property. You can move the guitar from one place to another. A ball pen is also a movable property. You can move this ball pen from one place to another. And books, it's also considered a movable property. You can bring this book from one place to another. So, there are 3 tests to determine whether a property is movable or immovable. So the first test is if the property is capable of being carried from one place to place. That's test by description. So again, for example, this iPad, I can bring this iPad from one place to another. I usually bring this iPad during exam. So I can bring this iPad from Laguna to San Beda, Alabang. That's test by description. Again, letter B, if such change in location can be made without injuring the real property to which it may, in the meantime, be attached. So, a perfect example of this one is a picture frame. For example, I have a picture frame attached to the wall. I can detach temporarily that picture frame and bring it to somewhere without injuring the wall of our house. The wall of our house, of course, that is considered as immovable property. Number 2, letter C, if finally the object is not one of those enumerated or included in Article 415. Thus, test by exclusion. So, earlier, we discussed that Article 415 enumerates the immovable property. So the hint is if the object is not part of enumeration provided under Article 415 of the Civil Code, that property can be considered as movable property. So that's the hint, or that's the clue. Kinds of movable property. So, Article 416, Paragraph 1, those movable, susceptible appropriation which are not included in the preceding article. So, again, the hint is if the object is not part of enumeration provided under Article 415 of the Civil Code, that property can be considered as movable property. Paragraph 2 of Article 416, real property which by any special provision of law is considered as personality. So the perfect example of this one is growing crops for the purpose of chattel mortgage law. And another thing is that another example in the case of Davao Sawmill versus Castillo, machinery placed on a tenement by a tenant who did not act as an agent of the tenement owner. That's a perfect example of this paragraph 2 of Article 416. Number 3, force of nature which are both under the control by science. So an example of this one is electricity, okay, gas, heat, atomic energy, okay, water power. Those are force of nature which are both under the control by science. That's under the Civil Code. Number 4, in general, all things which can be transported from one place to another without impairment of the real property to which they are fixed. My example earlier is the picture frame. Another example, my college diploma. I have a college diploma attached to the wall, and I can temporarily detach that college diploma and travel and bring it to somewhere without injuring the wall of our house. Okay? The wall of our house is considered as, of course, that's immovable property. That's a perfect example of this, paragraph 4 of Article 416. Article 417, obligations and actions which have for their object movable and demandable sum. So, for example, if someone steals my cell phone, my right to bring an action to recover my cell phone is a personal property. And number 6, shares of stock of agricultural, commercial, industrial entities, although they may have a real estate. Shares of stock, that's a corporate term. Okay? Shares of stock in a corporation is a personal property. Okay, let's go to the classification of movable property. So there are two kinds of classification, according to their nature and according to the intention. So let's discuss the classification according to their nature. Again, according to their nature, there are two kinds, consumable and non-consumable. When we say consumable, of course, from the word itself, consumable, this cannot be used according to its nature without its being consumed. So, a perfect example is food. You cannot use a food without consuming it. Right? Okay, that's consumable. Number 2, non-consumable. Any other kinds of property or any other kinds of movable property. That's non-consumable. Classification according to its intention, fungible and non-fungible. When we say fungible, again, from the word itself, replaceable by an equal quality and quantity. So, for example, I borrowed a 1 kilo of rice from a friend for lunch or dinner. Of course, I cannot return the same 1 kilo of rice to my friend, but I can buy from a market the same quality of that rice and return it to my friend. Okay? In the case of fungible, I can no longer return the same 1 kilo of rice, but I can buy a 1 kilo of rice of same quality and quantity and return it to my friend. That's fungible. So when we say naman non-fungible, it's irreplaceable because identical object must be returned. So for example, this watch, I borrowed this watch from a friend, so I can return it, the same watch, to my friend. Okay. So that's it. However, we have to remember that, for example, I borrowed a 1 kilo of rice from a friend, but not for the purpose of consuming it, but for the purpose of display or exhibition. So, that 1 kilo of rice become non-fungible because I can technically return the same 1 kilo of rice to my friend because my purpose not to consume it, but only to display it. And if you are familiar with the term mutuum and comodatum in the law of credit transaction, a loan of rice for consumption is considered a simple loan or mutuum, and while the loan of rice for exhibition is considered as comodatum. That's additional knowledge. Okay, so that's the end of my report for the movable property. Now again, my name is Kim Abraham Ramos, and good evening po, attorney.
Hay, akala ko pag maglo-loan, bigay na lang agad. Kailangan pa pala ng security. Mag-execute na lang kaya ako ng mortgage sa factory ko at end sa machineries. Uy, Attorney Ace, buti nakita ko kayo dito.
Hello, Sir Dan. Anong problema?
Gusto ko sana humingi ng advice. Maglo-loan kasi ako kaso kailangan daw ng security. Plano ko sana mag-execute ng mortgage, kaso first time ko lang kung sakali.
Okay, Sir Dan. Pag mortgage, meron tayong mortgages for real and personal properties, which are real estate mortgage and chattel mortgage respectively. Anong properties po ba yung imo-mortgage nyo?
Yung factory ko po sa Cavite, kasama yung ilang machineries doon. Since yung ibang machineries na kasama ay mabigat, bolted at sementado sa sahig at pag inalis, madadamage yung concrete floor. Diba, attorney, immovable pa yun? So, dapat ba deed of real and chattel mortgage? Tama ba, attorney?
Oo, Sir Dan. Possible na real property sa machineries na yon. Kaso mag-ingat ka kasi kapag ang mortgage nyo ay styled as real and chattel mortgage, it implies that you intended all the machinery as chattels according to the case of Chai versus Court of Appeals. Dapat mag-execute ka ng real estate mortgage regarding sa building and separate ang chattel mortgage with the list of properties that you want to include para hindi magulo.
Okay. So, pag regarding sa chattel mortgage, attorney, pwede ko bang i-claim na real property pa rin yun?
Hindi na, Sir Dan, kasi in that case, mag-a-apply ang principle of estoppel.
Ano po yun? Hindi ko po gets yung principle na yun.
Simple lang nga, Sir Dan, no? According to that principle, if the parties agree to consider the machineries as personal properties, they are stopped from denying that the property is personal property, just like in the case of Makati Leasing versus Forever Textile Mills. At itong principle na to, hindi lang siya applicable sa machineries, applicable din siya sa ibang klaseng properties.
Okay. So, ganun pala yun, attorney. Buti na lang nakita ka dito sa bangko.
No problem, Sir Dan. Palit siya sa'yo.
Ay, wait lang, attorney. Meron pa pala akong isang question last na. Possible po ba na ang mortgage ay chattel mortgage over the building, like the factory or even a house? Kasi pwede naman pala makonsider yung mga real property as personal by applying the principle of estoppel.
Actually, pwede yan. However, sabi sa case ni Evangelista versus Alto Surety Insurance and Insurance Company, yung parties sa deed of chattel mortgage may agree to consider a house as a personal property for the purpose of said contract. But it is only considered as personal property as between the parties themselves. Yung principle na yun, hindi siya mag-apply sa strangers. So regarding sa strangers, real property pa rin yung buy or building kahit ano pa yung agreement nila.
Okay, so ganun pala yun, attorney. Maraming salamat.
Wala naman, Sir Dan. Yun lang naman.